The Wilcox family dinners had always been a tradition. Every Sunday evening, no matter what work or personal obligations loomed, the family would gather around the long polished oak table at John and Margaret Wilcox's home. It was a ritual meant to bind them together, a sign that family stood above all else. That night, the table was set as perfectly as ever. Crystal glasses caught the light of the chandelier, silver cutlery glimmered against the cream tablecloth, and the smell of roast chicken mingled with warm bread rolls in the air. Conversation bubbled easily. Daniel Wilcox, their only son, talked about his recent project at the construction firm, while his wife Emily chimed in with polite questions. John nodded approvingly from the head of the table, though his gaze often lingered longer than usual. Beside him sat Margaret, smiling sweetly at her son and daughter-in-law. To anyone else, she looked like a picture of calm domesticity. But John wasn't anyone else. He had been married to Margaret for almost 30 years, and he knew the tiny gestures that betrayed her emotions. The way her fingers fidgeted with her napkin, the light flush that crept into her cheeks when she wouldn't meet his eyes. As the meal went on, John found his attention drifting, not to his son, but to the subtle closeness between Margaret and Emily. On the surface, they looked like a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law who had become unusually close. The occasional laugh shared between their private glances, the way Margaret refilled Emily's glass before she even asked. But beneath that polished surface, something unsettled him. More than once John noticed Emily's hand brush against Margaret's under the table, quick, almost hidden to anyone glancing over casually. Most wouldn't think twice. John did. He wasn't prone to wild imaginations, and when his instincts tugged at him, he listened. "Dad," Daniel said, breaking John's train of thought. "I was thinking, I might take Emily up to the lake this summer. One of those cabins." "That'd be nice," John replied, though his voice was unusually flat. His eyes flicked instinctively toward Emily. She was biting her lips slightly, hiding a smile. Not a smile for Daniel. A smile for Margaret, who avoided John's gaze altogether. The air in the room seemed thicker to John, though everyone else continued laughing and eating as though nothing was amiss. He made himself drink from his glass, swallowing the bitterness rising in his throat. As the meal ended, Margaret and Emily stood side by side at the sink, laughing quietly as they washed and dried the dishes. John lingered in the living room, the muffled voices spilling in from the kitchen. He noticed Margaret's hand resting too long on Emily's shoulder as she reached for a towel. It was subtle, almost nothing, but it was enough. For the first time, John no longer saw a typical Sunday dinner table. He saw secrets hidden in plain sight, and deep in his chest, something began to harden, an unease that would only grow. The first time Emily spoke the words aloud, it was late at night in the garage of the Wilcox home. Rain tapped against the thin roof, a steady background hush, as the two women stood facing each other after yet another family dinner. Margaret had started cleaning up, gathering unopened wine bottles to store away, when Emily suddenly blurted out, her voice trembling, "I can't keep pretending anymore." Margaret froze, one hand clutching a dusty bottle by its neck. She turned slowly, her green eyes widening. The garage smelled of oil and damp cardboard, but to Emily, it suddenly felt suffocating, like the air had been pulled out of the room. Emily stepped closer, lowering her voice though no one was around. 3 years, Margaret. 3 years of meeting in shadows, slipping glances at the table, holding back what we really feel. Her hand brushed Margaret's wrist, lingering there. "Don't you get tired of hiding?" Margaret's lips parted, a tremor rippling across her composed face. She'd been the steady one all these years, the one whispering caution when Emily wanted boldness. And yet, she also knew the truth. She lived for these stolen moments. Every time Emily laughed, every touch of her hand, every look that burned hotter than it should have. It had kept her alive in ways her marriage hadn't for a very long time. "Emily, you don't know what you're saying," Margaret whispered, though the resistance in her words sounded thin, fragile. "I know exactly what I'm saying." Emily's voice tightened, a quiet desperation laced through it. "I love you. I'm done pretending you're just my mother-in-law. Everything I want. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain on the tin roof, growing harsher. Margaret's heart pounded, and somewhere in another part of the house, John's deep footsteps echoed faintly, distant but real, a reminder of the boundaries they were crossing. Finally, Margaret lowered the bottle in her hand and reached out, fingers stroking Emily's arm with the tenderness of a secret she had never dared to name. "I love you too," she whispered back, the words carrying both release and doom. That night, when Emily left the driveway, Margaret remained in the garage, staring at the shadows. Her pulse still raced with the confession, but dread churned in her stomach. Because secrets have weight, and Margaret knew they could never stay hidden forever. Daniel Wilcox had always prided himself on trust. Where others might pry, demand explanations, or grow suspicious, Daniel believed in giving space. He thought it made him a better husband, a more understanding man. So when his wife, Emily, began spending more and more time with his mother, Margaret, Daniel smiled and called it sweet. He never thought it strange that Emily often volunteered to stop by his parents' house even when he was tied up at work. He never questioned the late-night phone calls or the way his mother and his wife sometimes seemed to share private laughter right in front of him. "Those two have become inseparable," he remarked one Saturday morning, pouring himself coffee. He said it lightly, almost with pride, as if Emily and Margaret's bond was proof of how well their family fit together. Emily, standing at the counter slicing apples, forced a smile. "Your mom's been good to me," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the knife instead of his face. Daniel didn't notice the guarded tone or the way her hands shook for a moment. To Daniel, everything looked perfect. A young marriage, a stable job, loving parents just a few miles away. Sunday dinners were still intact. And if Emily sometimes stayed late at his parents' house, insisting his mother needed company, he only felt grateful. What Daniel didn't see, what he refused even to suspect, was the way Margaret's eyes lingered too long on Emily across the table. He didn't notice his mother touch Emily's arm with an intimacy too delicate for mere affection. He missed the patterns, each one clear enough to anyone who dared look closely. But one person did look closely. John Wilcox sat silent in those family moments, his own coffee cooling in front of him as he studied. The way his wife leaned in toward their daughter-in-law, the softness in their voices when they spoke, the shared glances that carried hidden meaning. John saw it all. And while Daniel's trust blinded him, John's suspicion sharpened. Daniel thought his life was safe, settled, simple. He had no idea his world was already cracking at the edges. And soon that crack would split wide open. The Wilcox home was never truly quiet. Pipes groaned through the walls, the kitchen clock ticked ceaselessly, and Margaret liked to keep soft classical music playing in the background. But on one weekday evening, returning from an unexpected early job finish, John Wilcox noticed a different kind of silence, hushed, urgent, and alive with secrecy. He parked his truck a little farther down the street, his mind still heavy with suspicion built from months of subtle tells. Margaret had said she'd be running errands. Emily, meanwhile, had told Daniel she planned to spend the night at a friend's, helping with wedding plans. John wasn't interested in coincidences anymore. His gut told him what his mind refused to accept. They were lying. The front door was left ajar, unusual for Margaret, who was obsessed with locks. John stepped inside, boots damp from a drizzle outside. The faint murmur of voices drifted down the hall from the guest bedroom. He moved with deliberate slowness, half a husband, half a predator circling prey. Each step made the carpet creak under his weight. "We can't keep this up," a voice whispered. Emily's. Low, breaking, but alive with feverish emotion. Margaret responded, trembling and soft. "I can't let you go. I never could." The words landed in John's ears like gunshots. His breath caught as he neared the guest room door, which was cracked open just enough for him to see shadows shifting on the wall. Emily's pale hand reached out, touching Margaret's cheek, and then the whispered words that confirmed everything. "I love you." The sight slammed into him harder than any blow. Years of marriage, fatherhood, and trust shattered in less than a heartbeat. His chest tightened until it burned, each inhale ragged and shallow. John pushed the door open, slowly, silently, until the hinges groaned. Both women froze. Margaret's face went pale as she jerked back from Emily. Emily's eyes widened with panic, her lips parting as though to explain the impossible. John didn't yell. He didn't throw punches or rage. He only stared, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret tried first. "John, please." But John raised a hand, silencing her. His voice came low, ragged, guttural. "I saw enough." Turning away, he left the room, his boots thudding down the hall. The slam of the front door shook the walls. In that moment, Margaret collapsed against the bed, her breath hitching, while Emily rushed to her, whispering frantic reassurances. Neither of them noticed John's truck idling outside for a long moment before finally driving off. He didn't scream because he didn't need to. The betrayal had already carved its place in his bones. And by then, John Wilcox was no longer just a suspicious husband. He was a man who had seen everything, who now carried a decision like a live round waiting in a chamber. John Wilcox had always believed himself to be a man of control. He wasn't perfect. Temper ran in his bloodline. But through 3 decades of marriage and raising a son, he had contained it. Until now, after the night of the discovery, the house itself turned into a battlefield of silence. Margaret moved through its rooms with her head down, whispering excuses about errands or charity work. John answered with grunts, his voice clipped short, his eyes cold. And every time Emily came by, John's stomach turned to stone. But the nights were the hardest. He would lie in the recliner, a tumbler of whiskey sweating in his hand, the dry click of the grandfather clock echoing through the darkened living room. Across from him, on the silver tray by the lamp, sat his revolver, a weapon that had once only been used for hunting trips with Daniel. Now, it beckoned in the silence like a solution he wasn't ready to admit aloud. The visions tormented him. He saw Emily's hand against Margaret's cheek, that whispered, "I love you," repeating in his mind until it drowned out everything else. He saw Margaret's flushed face, her guilty eyes darting away. To John, it wasn't just betrayal of fidelity. It was humiliation. The image of his son Daniel, blissfully ignorant, struck him hardest. His wife and his son's wife. The very foundation of his family crumbling under his roof. And John couldn't bear that shame. One evening, as Margaret quietly set down his dinner plate, he spoke for the first time in days. His voice was hoarse, dangerous. "How long?" Her hand froze on the fork she had just placed. She didn't respond. The silence was answer enough. John slammed his fist on the table. "How long, damn it?" Margaret's chin quivered. 3 years, she whispered, her voice barely audible. His breathing grew sharp, jagged. He stared at her like she was a stranger. 3 years. Not a mistake, not a passing weakness. A life lived behind his back. After that night, words became weapons. Short, venomous exchanges between husband and wife filled the air. Margaret pleaded for understanding, begged him to keep the family intact. But John's silence carried more threat than shouting ever could. When Daniel dropped by, unaware of the storm under the roof, John forced a mask of normalcy. But the moment Daniel left, the mask slipped. Margaret's voice quivered as she begged him not to tell their son. The whiskey bottle inched lower each night. The revolver remained on the tray. And with every hour spent in silence, betrayal became not just an offense. It became something monstrous in John's mind, something that demanded blood as repayment. By the 7th night, neighbors later said they heard John pacing the halls until dawn, muttering to himself, "How could they? Under my roof, my family." The breaking point had been reached. All that remained was the choice of when and how he would finally shatter. The storm rolled in just after dusk, a hard September rain that battered rooftops and rattled the Wilcox windows. John sat in his recliner, staring at the revolver laid neatly on the tray beside his empty whiskey glass. The rhythmic thunder outside matched the pounding in his chest. He had replayed their betrayal 1,000 times in his mind, each memory sharper, each whisper between Margaret and Emily cutting deeper into the marrow of his pride. Emily was due to stop by that evening. She told Daniel she needed to drop something off for Margaret. Another thin excuse. John knew better. He had memorized the lies, the way Emily timed her visits like clockwork, almost daring him to notice. This time he would not ignore it. At 8:47 p.m., headlights swept across the driveway. Emily's small sedan slowed to a stop, wipers smearing rain from the windshield. She stepped out, umbrella in hand, hunching against the storm. Margaret, hearing the car pull up, started for the door with a nervous glance over her shoulder, only to freeze. John was already standing there, revolver heavy in his fist. "Go sit down," he growled at his wife. His voice was gravel, low and final. Margaret's lips parted, trembling. "John, please. Now." She backed into the living room, eyes wide with dread, her body shaking as she lowered herself onto the sofa. The thunder outside broke like a drumroll as Emily approached the porch, unaware that anything had changed. John opened the front door before she could knock. Emily froze, rain dripping down her hair. The sight of him, his face pale, jaw clenched, eyes hollow, stilled her words before they began. "Mr. Wilcox?" she started, but her voice faltered when she saw what glinted in his hand. "You destroyed my family," John said, each syllable thick with rage. His knuckles whitened around the revolver's grip. Emily stepped back, palms raised. "It wasn't John, please listen." But he didn't want reasons. He didn't want lies twisted into apologies. The first shot cracked through the storm, echoing across the neighborhood. Emily screamed as the bullet tore into her shoulder, spinning her against the porch rail. The second shot came before she could regain breath, sinking into her abdomen. Gasping, she staggered forward, trying to reach him, trying to plead. The third shot silenced her. She collapsed onto the wet pavement of the driveway, blood pooling as the rain carried it into the cracks. Inside the house, Margaret's scream ripped through the night as she rushed to the doorway, falling to her knees beside Emily's broken body. She cradled the young woman's head against her chest, sobbing into her hair, the storm washing her face in tears and rain. John stood frozen, revolver still smoking in his hand. The rage had burned out, leaving only emptiness. Neighbors' voices cut through the downpour, panicked and alarmed. A call was being made, sirens were already on their way. John knew it. He didn't move. He didn't run. As the red and blue lights lit up the rain-soaked street, John raised his hands slowly, wordlessly, the revolver slipping from his wet fingers. Officers closed in, shouting orders he barely heard. Margaret still clutched Emily on the ground, rocking, whispering her name like prayer. Daniel hadn't arrived yet. He would hear the news soon of his father's crime, his wife's death, and his mother's betrayal. And the Wilcox family, already fractured by secrets, had been shattered forever by 3 shots in the night. Red and blue lights painted the rain-slicked street, their flashing glow reflecting off puddles like broken glass. The storm still raged overhead, but it was the chaos in the Wilcox driveway that drew every neighbor from their windows. Margaret was still kneeling in the rain, her arms cradling Emily as if holding her tightly could will the life back into her limp body. Her hands were stained crimson, her hair plastered to her face. She rocked back and forth, keening low, raw sounds that cut deeper than screams. Over and over, she whispered Emily's name as though the syllables alone were enough to stop time. "Ma'am, step back," an officer shouted, pulling gently at her arm. She resisted, crying louder until at last her body gave way and she let them take Emily from her embrace. Medics rushed in, but it was already too late. Every officer present knew it, though Margaret refused to accept the stillness of Emily's chest. John stood several feet away, motionless, the revolver now kicked aside in the mud. His hands were raised, his expression eerily blank, as if the weight of what he had done had drained the fury from him, leaving only a husk. 2 deputies cuffed his wrists behind him, reading his rights over the sound of pounding rain. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. His sharp breath fogged in the night air, his shoulders heavy, His eyes locked on the driveway as though unable to look away. Then came Daniel. He tore down the street in his truck, brakes squealing as he stopped at the barricade. He leapt from the driver's seat, slipping on the wet asphalt. "Emily!" he shouted, sprinting toward the flashing lights. "What happened? Where is she?" The officers tried to stop him, but Daniel shoved past them in blind panic. Then he saw her. The sheet, the blood, the body stilled beneath the medic's hands. His cry cracked louder than thunder. He fell to his knees, clawing toward his wife, but Margaret lunged forward to hold him back, her own arms trembling. "Danny, don't look." He pushed her away, eyes wild, betrayal not yet named but already burning inside him. Margaret sobbed, reaching toward both her son and the woman she had loved, caught between grief and guilt. Then Daniel's gaze turned, and found his father in handcuffs. "Dad!" Daniel's voice broke, half question, half horror. John could not meet his son's eyes. He only shook his head once, slow, almost imperceptible. The deputies led John toward the cruiser. Daniel staggered forward, rain pouring over him, his voice ragged with fury. "You killed her. You killed my wife." His words tore the night open. He lunged toward the police, screaming, but was held back, restrained by 2 officers. "How could you do this to me? To us?" Inside the squad car, John stared blankly through the window, face lit by lightning. Margaret crumpled against the pavement, clutching her chest like her heart had been ripped clean from her body. By dawn, the yellow tape lined the Wilcox property. Neighbors retreated back into their quiet homes, whispering the kind of gossip that would cling to the street for decades. One house, once the center of Sunday dinners, now reeked of crime, shame, and blood in the rain. And as the first light broke, 3 lives were destroyed. 1 dead, 1 behind bars, and 1 left standing in the ashes of a family that would never be whole again. The courthouse was packed. By the time John Wilcox was brought in, his hands shackled at his sides, the gallery benches were already crowded with reporters, neighbors, and those who had followed every headline. "Father shoots daughter-in-law after family affair revealed." The whispers rose as he entered, some sharp with outrage, others hushed with morbid curiosity. Daniel sat in the front row, his face hollowed, eyes red with sleepless nights. He wouldn't look at his father, not once. Margaret sat a few rows behind him, her presence drawing stares like a flame in a dry field. She refused to hide, though her face bore the weight of guilt heavier than any chains. When the trial began, the prosecutor wasted no time painting the picture. A husband consumed by rage, betrayed by his wife's 3-year affair with their daughter-in-law. It was a calculated act of vengeance. The prosecutor told the jury, his voice cold. John Wilcox armed himself. He waited, and then he ended Emily Wilcox's life when she posed no threat to him. This was not a crime of passion, it was murder. The defense countered by depicting John as a broken man pushed to the edge of sanity. His lawyer argued it was a crime of betrayal, of unbearable provocation that shattered reason. John Wilcox was a husband and a father who discovered not only an affair, but a bond so unthinkable it struck at the very core of his family. He did not plan this. He snapped. The truth spilled out slowly, painfully, as witnesses took the stand. A neighbor testified to hearing the argument and the 3 shots that followed. A responding officer recounted how Margaret had clutched Emily's body on the rain-soaked driveway, screaming his name over and over. Then Margaret herself was called. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as she spoke, her voice trembling, each word a blade. "Yes, it's true. Emily and we'd been involved. For 3 years." She paused, squeezing the railing before her. "I loved her. I loved her in a way I never thought I could love anyone again. But I never wanted, never imagined, it would end like this." Daniel stood abruptly, face twisted with rage. "Stop!" he screamed before being restrained back into his seat. His head dropped into his hands, shoulders shaking as the courtroom watched him unravel. When John finally spoke in his defense, his words were bare, stripped of bravado. "I saw them together, heard the words, My wife, my son's wife. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. For days it ate me alive. And when she came that night, I couldn't stop myself. His eyes stayed downcast, never once glancing in Margaret's direction. The jury deliberated for hours that stretched into days. Every detail, the years of deceit, the broken trust, the crack of gunfire in the night was weighed. And when they returned, their faces were heavy with the verdict. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, John Wilcox, guilty of second-degree murder. The words dropped over the room like a hammer blow. Daniel sat frozen, eyes closed as if the decision could not undo what was already irrevocable. Margaret let out a soft, strangled sob, her face buried in trembling hands. John lowered his head. For the first time in weeks, his shoulders slumped, as though the fight, the fire, the fury had finally drained into nothing but defeat. The family name, once respected, was now shackled forever to betrayal, scandal, and death. The day of sentencing arrived beneath a gray, unforgiving sky. Crowds still packed the courthouse, though the frenzy of the trial had eased into something heavier. An air of finality, as if everyone in town knew the story was approaching its bitter end. John Wilcox entered in the same gray suit he'd worn throughout the trial, his wrists bound once more. He looked smaller now, a shadow of the man who once commanded his household with quiet authority. His gaze barely lifted as he was led to the defendant's table. Judge Harrington's voice filled the silent chamber. John Wilcox, this court has found you guilty of second-degree murder. Today you will be sentenced accordingly. Before the punishment was delivered, the court allowed family members to speak. Margaret rose slowly, shaking as she steadied herself against the podium. Her voice cracked. I lost everything the moment Emily died. She wasn't just my daughter-in-law. She was the person I loved. The gallery gasped, though the truth had long been laid bare in testimony. And John, you didn't just take her from me. You destroyed Daniel's life. Our life. And though I can never forgive you, part of me will grieve you too, until the day I die. Then came Daniel. He walked to the stand stiffly, his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the floor. When he spoke, his voice carried a rawness that silenced the room. My wife is gone. My marriage, my trust, my family. It's all ashes. I lived blind while the people closest to me betrayed me. My father murdered my wife. My mother loved her. His voice faltered, trembling on the edge of breaking. Slowly, he raised his eyes at last, and the pain in them was unbearable. He looked directly at John. You were supposed to protect this family. You were supposed to protect me. But instead, you destroyed everything. I don't care what the sentence is. My life has already been given a punishment worse than prison, because I'm the one left alive. John's lips parted, but no sound came. Their gazes locked for only a moment before Daniel turned away, shoulders shaking. The judge's voice then echoed across the courtroom. John Wilcox, you are hereby sentenced to 30 years in state prison for the crime of second-degree murder. The gavel struck. The case of State versus Wilcox was closed. As deputies took John by the arms, Daniel remained frozen, neither watching his father leave nor acknowledging Margaret's quiet sobs behind him. The family that once gathered every Sunday around a warm table had been reduced to 3 broken lives, sitting in separate shadows.